Welcome to Dark Hours of Day, where we share true stories that will keep you looking over your shoulder. These aren't ghost stories or urban legends. These are real experiences from real people who have encountered the unexplainable and the unsettling. What you're about to hear actually happened to someone just like you. Before we begin, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to Dark Hours of the Day. It really helps us out. If these stories resonate with you, please share them with someone who appreciates the darker side of reality. Now, dim the lights and prepare yourself, because true horror doesn't need fiction. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but it's been eating away at me for months now. I need to get it off my chest. Last year, I had to spend 3 nights at Riverside General after a pretty nasty car accident. Nothing life-threatening, just a broken leg and some internal bruising, but enough to keep me under observation. I never stayed overnight in a hospital before, and honestly, I didn't think much of it at first. Just another boring few days in an uncomfortable bed with a mediocre food, right? And the first night went exactly like you'd expect. Nurses coming in every few hours to check my vitals, the beeping of machines, the occasional announcement over the PA system. I was in a shared room, but the other bed was empty, which I was grateful for. But the second night, I was getting used to the routine. It was during that second night I started to notice something off. I woke up at about 2:30 a.m. because of the pain in my leg. The medication was wearing off and I was about to press the call button when I heard voices in the hallway. Not unusual in a hospital, obviously, but something about the tone made me pause. They were whispering urgently, almost frantically. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it didn't sound like normal hospital talk. Then I heard a cart being wheeled past my door, moving fast. I caught a glimpse of 2 nurses and a doctor through a small window in my door. Their faces were tense, focused. One of the nurses was carrying what looked like a binder with a distinctive red stripe across it. I didn't think much of it right then. Hospitals have emergencies all the time, right? I pressed the call button, got my pain meds, and drifted back to sleep. The next day, during morning rounds, a different doctor than my usual one came in, Dr. Chen, according to his badge. He seemed distracted, kept looking at the empty bed beside me. "Has anyone been in that bed?" he asked suddenly. "No," I replied. "It's been empty since I got here." He nodded, made a note, and then asked about my pain levels. The whole interaction felt weird, but again, I brushed it off. Doctors are busy. They see dozens of patients. Maybe he had me confused with someone else. It was the 3rd night when things really got strange. I was having trouble sleeping because the guy in the next room was watching TV really loudly. Around midnight, a nurse I hadn't seen before came in to check on my vitals. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with graying hair, pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag said her name was Margaret. "Excuse me," I said, "is there any way to ask the patient next door to turn the TV down?" She frowned. "There is no patient in room 318. That room's being renovated." I was confused, but I can hear the TV through the wall. She didn't respond, just finished taking my blood pressure and left without another word. The TV next door went silent about 10 minutes later. I finally managed to fall asleep around 1 a.m., but I woke up again exactly at 3:17 a.m. I remember checking on the clock at the wall. The hospital was eerily quiet. No beeping machines, no distant voices, nothing. It felt wrong. And then I heard it, the squeak of wheels moving slowly down the hallway. I sat up in bed, curious. The sound stopped right outside my door. Through the small window, I could see a hospital bed being wheeled by 2 orderlies and a nurse. There was someone in the bed, and they were completely covered by a sheet. My first thought was that someone had died, but why would they be moving a body at this hour? And why not use a regular gurney instead of a bed? The procession stopped right at my door. One of the orderlies, a tall man with a shaved head, turned and looked directly at me through the window. We made eye contact, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His face was expressionless, almost unnaturally blank. He held my gaze for what felt like forever. Then he turned away and continued down the hall. I pressed the call button immediately, but there was no response. I pressed it again and again. Nothing. After what felt like hours, but It was probably only a few minutes. I heard footsteps approaching. A young nurse I recognized from earlier shifts poked her head in. "Is everything okay?" she asked, looking tired. "I've been pressing the call button," I asked. "Did you see him just now, the people moving that covered bed?" Her expression changed subtly. "Sir, I've been at the nurse's station for the past hour. No one's moved any patients on this floor." "But I saw them right outside my door," I insisted. "Two orderlies and a nurse. One of the guys looked right at me." She came into the room fully now, checked the monitors next to my bed. "Your heart rate's elevated. Are you in pain? Maybe you were dreaming." I knew I wasn't dreaming, but I also knew how it must have sounded. So I just nodded and accepted the additional pain medication she offered. The next morning, as I was being discharged, I mentioned what I'd seen to my regular doctor during the final checkup. "Sometimes the night shift can seem a little strange," he said vaguely. "Hospitals are different at night." I was about to leave it at that when I noticed a binder on his desk with the same distinctive red stripe that I'd seen the nurse carrying the first night. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to it. He glanced down, then quickly closed the folder. "Just administrative files, nothing important." I got dressed and I was waiting for my sister to pick me up in the lobby when I spotted Dr. Chen at the reception desk. I don't know what made me do it, but I approached him. "Excuse me, Dr. Chen, I wanted to ask you something before I leave." He looked at me blankly. "Do I know you?" "You saw me yesterday morning, room 317. You asked about my empty bed." His expression didn't change. "I think you have me confused with someone else. I wasn't on shift yesterday." Before I could respond, the receptionist interrupted. "Dr. Chen, they're waiting for you in room 318. Room 318, the supposedly vacant room next to mine. Dr. Chen nodded at her and then walked away without another word to me. As I was leaving, I passed the hospital directory board in the lobby. Out of curiosity, I checked the floor plan for the third floor. According to the map, room 318 didn't exist. The room numbers just jumped from 317 to 319. My sister arrived and drove me home, and I tried to forget about the whole experience. But a few weeks later, I was reading the local news online when I saw a small article about Riverside General Hospital. 3 staff members, 2 orderlies and a nurse, had been fired for ethical violations regarding patient care. There was no further explanation. I've tried researching more about what might be happening at that hospital, but I haven't found anything concrete. I've considered reporting what I saw to someone, but who would believe me? And what exactly would I report? All I know is that whenever I drive past Riverside General at night now, I always notice that there are lights on certain rooms on the 3rd floor, even though, according to their website, that entire wing is closed for renovations. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I can see figures moving between those rooms, wearing white coats, wheeling someone covered. I don't know what they're doing in those rooms that don't seem to exist, and honestly, I don't want to know. What I do know is one thing for certain. If I ever need to go to the hospital again, I'm driving the extra 30 minutes and going to St. Marie's instead. I never paid much attention to the backgrounds of my photos. I mean, who does, right? You take pictures to capture moments, people, places you want to remember. The focus is always what's on the foreground. Your friends, your family, that amazing sunset. Nobody really looks at what's happening behind all that. At least I didn't. Not till about 8 months ago. I've always been big on documenting my life. My parents got me my first digital camera when I was 14, and I've been taking photos obsessively ever since. When smartphones came along, it just made it easier. I'm 32 now, so we're talking almost 2 decades of photos. Thousands upon thousands of them. Last summer, I was going through a pretty rough breakup. Amy and I had been together for almost 4 years, and suddenly I was alone in our apartment with all these memories. One night, after maybe 1 too many glasses of wine, I started going through old photos. You know, that masochistic thing you do after a breakup, and you just torture yourself with happy memories. I was scrolling through vacation photos from a trip to San Diego we'd taken 3 years ago. Beach photos, pics from the zoo, Balboa Park, all that touristy stuff. And there was this one picture of Amy standing in front of a fountain. Nothing special about it, just a normal vacation snapshot. But as I was staring at it, something in the background caught my eye. There was this man sitting on a bench, maybe 30 feet behind Amy. He was wearing a dark blue baseball cap and sunglasses. Something about him seemed, I don't know, deliberate? Like he was trying to look casual but wasn't quite pulling it off. I don't know why he caught my attention, honestly, just one of those things. I kept scrolling and forgot about it until I came to our photo from Grand Canyon on the following year. We were at one of those lookout points, and I'd taken a picture of Amy with the canyon behind her. As I looked at it, I felt this weird chill. In the background, near one of the information plaques, was a man in a dark blue cap and sunglasses. Now I know what you're thinking. Baseball caps and sunglasses are hardly unusual, especially at tourist spots. But something made me pause. I zoomed in as much as I could without the picture getting too pixelated. The man was standing sort of sideways, looking at the plaque, but something about his posture was familiar. I started actively looking for him after that. I went back to older photos, a music festival in Austin 5 years ago, a weekend trip to Chicago with friends before I even met Amy. Once I started looking, I found him. Not in every photo, not even in every collection of photos, but enough. Always at a distance, always partially obscured or turned away, always with that same blue cap. I know how this sounds. I question myself too. I mean, how many men of average height and build wear blue baseball caps in America? Millions, probably. The more I looked, the more I convinced myself that it was the same person. The most unsettling one was from my cousin's wedding in Portland about 2 years ago. It was an indoor venue, a converted industrial space with big windows in the background of a group shot. You could see the street outside, and there he was, standing across the street looking directly at the building. By this point, I was thoroughly freaked out. I considered going to the police, but what would I even say? Officer, I think the same stranger has been in the background of my photos for years. They'd think I was crazy. Instead, I called my friend Megan, who works in IT security. She's the most level-headed person I know. I figured if anyone could talk me down from paranoia, it would be her. I sent her a bunch of photos with the man circled. She called me back an hour later. "Have you noticed anything else unusual?" she asked, her voice oddly tight. "Any sign that someone's been in your apartment? Any missing items? Strange calls?" That just made me more scared. "No, nothing like that. Why, do you think I'm right? Is it the same person?" "I can't say for sure," she said carefully, "but I've seen enough to think that you should take some precautions. Change your routine. Vary the times you leave for work. Maybe stay with a friend for a few days." I stayed with Megan for almost a week after that. Nothing happened. No strange sightings, no break-ins in my apartment. Eventually, I started to feel silly about the whole thing, convinced myself I was seeing patterns where there weren't any. That grief over my breakup had made me temporarily paranoid or crazy. I moved back to my place and tried to forget it. I even deleted a bunch of the old photos, trying to give myself a fresh start. For a few months, everything was normal. I started dating again, got promoted at work. Life moved on. Then, last month, I went on a weekend trip to New York with some friends. We did all the tourist things, Central Park, Times Square, the whole deal. When I got back, I was uploading the photos to my cloud storage, and I saw him. He was in the background of a picture that my friend had taken of me in Central Park. Same blue cap, same sunglasses, same posture. He was sitting on a bench about 50 feet behind me, facing my direction. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone. I called Megan immediately, and she came over right away. We went through all the photos from the trip. He was in 3 of them. The one in Central Park, one where he was barely visible in a crowd in Times Square, and one where he was entering a coffee shop across the street from where we had lunch. "This isn't random," Megan said finally. "Someone is following you." We went to the police the next day. The officer was surprisingly understanding, probably because Megan was with me and she knows how to talk to authority figures. They took copies of the photos and filed a report, but they were honest about the fact that there wasn't much they could do. The man hadn't approached me or made any threats. They suggested I document any further sightings and considered getting a restraining order if he ever made contact. I've become hyper-vigilant since then. I notice every person who stays in my vicinity for too long. I take different routes to work, vary my schedule, look over my shoulder constantly. I've stopped posting on social media entirely. I had Megan help me check all my devices for spyware or tracking apps. There wasn't anything there. 2 weeks ago, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. A picture of me taking a picture. I was standing on my apartment balcony, taking a photo of the sunset. The photo of me was clearly taken from street level, looking up. On the back, in neat handwriting, "I've been watching you watch the world. Soon you'll see me clearly." I've moved in with my parents temporarily. The police have the note. They say there's still not enough evidence of an actual threat to do much. They're keeping an eye on the situation. I keep thinking about all those photos over the years. How long has this person been following me? Why? What do they want? And most terrifying of all, how many photos do they have of me? I don't take pictures anymore. I can't bring myself to do it. Because now I know, sometimes the most important part of a photo isn't what you're focusing on. It's what's lingering in the background, watching and waiting. I've started looking at strangers differently. Any man of average height could be him. Anyone in a blue cap makes my heart race. I scan crowds instinctively looking for him, wondering if today is the day he'll finally approach me. The worst part is knowing that he's been there all along, witnessing moments of my life that I thought were private. Birthday celebrations, romantic vacations, casual outings with friends. He's been a silent observer to all of that, an uninvited guest in my memories. Sometimes I wonder if he's watching me right now as I write this. I wonder if he knows how thoroughly he's disrupted my life, how completely he's stolen my sense of security. And I wonder what happens when he decides he's tired of staying in the background. I installed the security cameras for peace of mind. That's the irony that keeps me up at night now. 4 months ago, all I wanted was to feel safe in my own home. Now I can't sleep without checking every closet, every corner, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. I've become that person. Let me back up. I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom house in a pretty average neighborhood in Columbus. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I bought it 3 years ago, after my divorce was finalized, and it represented a fresh start for me. The divorce wasn't especially messy, but after 10 years of marriage, I needed something that was just mine. At first, I loved the solitude. After years of compromising on everything, from what to watch on TV to what temperature the thermostat should be set at, having complete control over my living space felt liberating. I'd always been a bit of a night owl, so I developed a routine. I work from home as a graphic designer, so my schedule is flexible. I'd usually work till around 8 o'clock, then make dinner and watch movies or play video games until around 2 a.m. before finally heading to bed. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Sure, occasionally I'd hear a strange noise and think I'd left something in one place only to find it in another, but that's normal, right? We all have those moments where we question our own memory or get spooked by the house settling. Then 4 months ago, I went on a weekend trip to visit my brother in Cincinnati, and when I came back Sunday evening, something felt off. Nothing was missing or obviously moved, but I had this nagging feeling that someone had been inside my house. The air felt different somehow. It's hard to really explain. I found myself checking closets, looking under the bed like a kid afraid of monsters. It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake that feeling. That's when I decided to install security cameras. Nothing excessive, just a doorbell camera and 2 indoor cameras. One in the living room and one that pointed at the back door. Basic models that connect to your phone and alert you when they detect motion. For the first few weeks it was great. Just having them there made me feel safer. The only alerts I got were when I moved around the house or when my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, dropped off her occasional baked goods at my doorstep. She'd been trying to fatten me up since I moved in, convinced that the divorce had left me unable to feed myself properly. Then about a month ago, I was reviewing some of the footage from the previous night, not because I suspected anything, but because I'd heard a loud thump around 3 a.m. and wanted to check if something had fallen over. As I was scrolling through the timeline on my phone, I saw movement in the living room at 3:17 a.m. I tapped on that segment of footage, assuming I'd see my cat Orwell knocking something over. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. It wasn't Orwell, it was a person. A man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. This is the detail that still haunts me. A white surgical mask, just standing in the middle of my living room, completely still and looking directly at the camera. I nearly dropped the phone. I had to rewatch it multiple times, convinced I wasn't seeing things, but there he was. The footage showed him standing there for almost 3 minutes, completely motionless, except for the slight rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. Then he simply walked out of camera's view, toward the hallway that leads to the bedrooms, to my bedroom. There was no footage of him entering the house, no alerts had been triggered until that movement, and none after. It was as if he had just materialized in my living room and then vanished. I called the police immediately. They came, took a report, looked at the footage. They checked for signs of forced entry, but found none. My locks were intact, windows secure. The officer suggested that perhaps the man had a key, asked if anyone else had access to my house. I told them no one did, not even my ex-wife or family members. They increased patrols on my neighborhood, but told me there wasn't much else they could do without more evidence or any actual confrontation. They suggested I change my locks and consider a more comprehensive security system. I did both the very next day. I had every lock replaced, installed a monitored alarm system, added 3 more cameras inside and 2 outside. I took a week off work, too paranoid to focus on anything else. For the next week, I reviewed the security footage obsessively every morning. Nothing unusual appeared. I started to wonder if the man had somehow known that I'd installed the cameras, decided my house was no longer an easy target. Maybe I'd scared him off for good. I was wrong. Exactly 1 week after the first sighting, at exactly 3:17 a.m., there he was again. Same mask, same stillness. This time the camera caught him emerging from the hallway, as if he'd been in the bedroom area of the house, my bedroom, where I had been sleeping. The alarm hadn't gone off. None of the entry sensors had been triggered. Somehow, he'd gotten in without disturbing anything. In the footage, he walked to the center of the living room and stood there, looking at the new camera I'd installed in the corner. After a few minutes, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. It took me a second to realize what it was. A small key. My spare key, which I kept in a drawer in my home office. He held it up to the camera, almost like he was showing it to me, then put it back in his pocket and walked towards the back door. This time the door sensor registered it opening and closing, but for some reason, the alarm didn't trigger. I called the police again. Same response, more sympathetic this time, but not much they could do still. They took the footage, promised to look at it, suggested I stay with a friend or family member for a few days. I went to stay with my brother. While there, I researched everything I could about home security. I learned about all the ways standard systems can be bypassed or disabled. I discovered forums where people shared similar experiences, most of which were eventually explained by carbon monoxide leaks, sleepwalking, forgotten maintenance workers, or roommates playing pranks. None of those explanations fit my situation. After 3 days at my brother's, I returned home, armed with completely new security setups. Professional grade, with redundant systems, backup power supplies, multiple notification methods. I replaced every single door and window with high security versions. I even adopted a second cat, a large Maine Coon named Hemingway, partly for company and partly because I'd read that cats are sensitive to intruders. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps the additional security had finally deterred him. Then, while reviewing footage one morning, I noticed something strange. At exactly 3:17 a.m., all 7 of my cameras went offline simultaneously for exactly 6 minutes. When they came back on, nothing seemed out of place. But Orwell and Hemingway were both hiding under the bed and wouldn't come out until morning. That was when I found it, a small white envelope on my kitchen table. Inside was my spare key, the one he had shown to the camera and taken with him, along with a handwritten note. I could take more than just this, but I don't need to. I already have everything I need. I don't live in that house anymore. I packed my essential belongings the same day, never went back alone.
My brother helped me move everything else out later that week. I sold the house, well below market value, just to be rid of it. I live in an apartment building now, with secured access and a doorman. I've told no one my new address, except immediate family. I've changed jobs, changed my phone number, even changed the names of my cats. But sometimes, usually around 3 a.m. when I can't sleep, I wonder what he meant. What did he take from me, besides my security? What did he need? Most of all, I wonder, how long had he been coming into my house before I installed those cameras? How many nights had he stood in my living room, or worse, stood over my bed while I slept, completely unaware? The police never found him. They said without more evidence there wasn't much they could pursue. They suggested it might have been targeted intimidation tactics, possibly related to my ex-wife, but she'd moved to California years ago, had no reason to harass me. I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and the sleeplessness. She believes that in time, I'll be able to feel safe again. I'm not so sure, because the thing that terrifies me most, the thought I can't escape, is that maybe he's found my new place. Maybe he's still visiting me at night, only now he's more careful to disable the cameras first. Maybe he's standing in my living room right now as I type this, watching and waiting for 317 to come around once more. Thank you for listening to another set of true stories on Dark Hours of Day. If you found yourself checking the locks or looking twice at strangers after hearing these accounts, you're not alone. These experiences happen more often than we'd like to believe. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the darkness, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories that blur the line between everyday life and nightmare. Share this with someone who appreciates that sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that could happen to any of us. Until next time, stay vigilant in those dark hours of day.